Well, good evening, everyone. It is truly an honor to welcome you all to the launch of the Black History Month Speaker Series 2025 tonight, hosted by the Center for Global Partnerships and Learning at Pepperdine University Graduate School of Education and Psychology. Uh, as you all know, at the center, our mission is to empower new leaders and scholars through innovative programs, scholarly resources, and hands-on support, positioning them as catalysts for positive change in their fields and communities. Through education and leadership, we are committed to equipping individuals with the tools to drive impact and create meaningful change. The Black History Month is a time for deep reflection, celebration, and education. A time when we amplify voices that have shaped history, honor the resilience of Black communities, and continue the work of advancing justice, equity, and inclusion. This year's theme, Resilience Through Reclaiming Our Narrative, Black History, Black Stories, Black Truth, Black Power, speaks to the power of storytelling, truth-telling, and reclaiming history through lived experiences. Narratives hold transformative power. They inform our identities, our struggles, our victories, and our collective future. This series is about amplifying those voices, sharing those truths, and fostering a space where knowledge leads to action. To launch this powerful series, we are truly privileged to have with us Reverend Dr. Sharletta Green, an esteemed scholar, faith leader, and advocate whose work has been instrumental in education and social justice. Dr. Green's scholarship and leadership have centered on the intersection of faith, history, and identity. And tonight, she will guide us through the exploration of the history and significance behind this year's theme. Her insights will lay the foundation of the conversations we will engage in throughout this month. But before we begin, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the leadership of our Director of the Center for Global Partnerships and Learning, Dr. Gabriela Miramontes, whose vision continues to guide our work. I also want to extend my gratitude to our incredible team, Dr. Maria Brame, as I see her beautiful face here tonight, and the rest of the team, and a special appreciation to Dr. Asia Ghazi, whose dedication and effort in organizing the logistics of this series have made this event possible. Thank you all for your hard work and commitment. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Reverend Dr. Sharletta Green.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. It's good to be home.
It's good to see you too. It's good to have you back home.
It is. So good evening. Thank you all for taking time out of your schedules to be with us tonight. I'm going to share, and the PowerPoint is not the focal point. This is just to help me get through the notes that I need to get through. So this is not one of those sexy PowerPoints. It's not one of those like, oh my goodness, let's get excited. That's not where we are. What I am seeking to do is to give you the rationale and the history of why we're doing this and why it's important in the landscape that we are currently residing in. So, as you heard in the introduction, our focus this month is resilience through Black history, Black stories, Black truth, Black power. And as you can see this picture here, resilience is the ability to fall, pick ourselves up from the floor, quickly learn, and continue with our journey. And that has been the journey of Black people, African-American people, people throughout the diaspora since landing here on these shores in the United States. And so I want to give you the rationale. Why did this become the theme? And so anyone who had the opportunity to be in class with me while I was a student, who got to work with me when I was working in the center, knew that narrative was the thing that I was passionate about. You would often hear me say, whoever controls the narrative controls the outcome. What's the story behind this? And so as we embarked on all that is unfolding in our country, starting last year with the dawning of Project 2025, and then watching all that went on up to the election and now where we are, the power of narrative has not been more important until, you know, you really pay attention to this moment. And so I thought about it from this perspective when Dr. Gabby and I were talking about Black history. Like, what should be our focus? How do we honor the celebration? And so I'm going to start out by saying Black History Month really isn't for Black people. It's for everybody else who doesn't really know about us. We are Black 365. We understand what it means to be housed in Black skin, and to walk a journey that we have to walk that's very different than the rest of the world. And so it's an opportunity for us to share our story, to share our progress, to share our brilliance and our gifts in ways in which we otherwise don't get to share it in this concentrated space. Ultimately, when Black History started out, it wasn't meant to be like this whole month celebration. It was a week, you know? And actually, it started out just as a day and honoring the contributions of Black people to the United States. And it also highlighted our connection throughout the diaspora. So I'm going to give you the rationale, and then we're going to do what I do best. We're going to start with prayer, and we will end with prayer. All right. So here's the rationale. We live in an age where information is readily available and accessible. There is a propensity of purposeful disinformation and misinformation that is being swirled around in our ether, from social media to even sometimes in print media, and definitely now with mainstream media. We get all kinds of information that may not necessarily always ring true. It may be someone's opinion. It may be someone's hope, but it may not necessarily tell us the whole story. And so it's really important for us to understand what's going on. This became particularly important during the election season. For people who have children who play in the gaming world, we then realized that those gaming spaces held some information that may not have been helpful for young voters, that was often misleading and misguiding. And so I was paying attention to this. These challenges shape our narrative and what goes on, and it diminishes the accomplishments of Black people when we get reduced to one story or to one lens or to one moment in time. And so I wanted us to start doing something different, by claiming our own story, by telling our story and realizing it's as much our personal story as it is our community story, as it is the national story and the international story of where we are. So this celebration this year, 2025, is invested in correcting the story by taking a Sankofu approach to linking the past to the present to create a future, by celebrating our leaders, by celebrating the movements, by celebrating our successes, and learning from events that are a part of history as a people who have, in essence, helped to change the world and the landscape. We will have scholars and student scholars sharing their stories that connect from the past to understand our present. Each week, we will focus on various different ways of looking at narrative and the different aspects of those narratives from different backgrounds and different avenues. And so we'll tell you a little bit more about that. So as we start, I want to share these words from Howard Thurman with you. I need you. I need your sense of time always. I have an understanding and an underlying anxiety about things. Sometimes I am in a hurry to achieve my ends and am completely without patience. It is hard for me to realize that some growth is slow, that not all processes are swift. I cannot discriminate between what takes time to develop and what can be rushed because my sense of time is dulled. Oh, to understand the meaning of perspective, that I may do all things with a profound sense of leisure of time. I need your sense of order. The confusion of the details of living is sometimes overwhelming. The little things keep getting in my way, providing ready-made excuses for failure to do and be what I know I ought to do and be. Much time is spent on things that are not very important, while significant things are put in an insignificant place in my scheme of order. I must unscramble my affairs so that my life will become order. Oh God, I need your sense of order. I need your sense of the future. Teach me to know that life is ever on the side of the future. Keep alive in me the future look, the high hope. Let me not be frozen either by the past or the present. Grant me, O patient one, your sense of the future without which all life would sicken and die. So as we think about Sankofu tonight and what that means and why it's important, you can't go forward if you don't know where you've been. And so when we think about this whole idea of remembering forward as a way of thinking about it, we're taking a glance back at what's been going on and the foundation that's been laid. And yes, we want to learn from those things that went well, but we also want to learn from those things that didn't go well so that we might find a way in the present to build a future that has a firm foundation. And so, in doing this approach and looking at our stories, we're seeking to find wisdom and inspiration and knowledge. We're looking to spend time pulling from the blueprint that our ancestors laid for us, and not just us, but for a world. We're looking for that ancestral pride. We're looking for the stories of strength, of Black faith, of Black joy, of Black love, of Black beauty, of Black humanity. Because often in the narratives that we are hearing today, we seem insignificant. Our story seems insignificant. But if it was as insignificant as some would hope that it is, there would not be an effort to erase our history, our presence, our contributions, or to pretend like race doesn't matter. And so, as we look back in order to go forward, what we understand is that we live in this constant space of a narrative that swirls around a social construction called race. Genetically, we are all the same. We're human. We're not a different species. And yet it has been part of our landscape for the last 400 years that people have spent so much time dividing us based on the color of skin, the phenotypic expression of who we are, based on where we were born in the world, based on our ancestry. And it's been demonized. And my task, my hope is that we no longer allow that demonarchic expression and experience, and people who are okay with trafficking in that space tell our story to the next generation. We need to be able to say with pride and joy, when our people do work, we may prioritize who we are, but we know that what we do is for the whole of the community. We know that where we're going is about making sure all of humanity has what it needs. We stand on pride of being able to do amazing things with very little resources. We have started institutions on pennies. We have moved mountains with our hands. We have shifted the landscape and changed the world with our tears and our outcries for a better place, for not just us, but for all people. So narrative. When you think about narrative, what we always forget is the story that we tell ourselves over and over again about who we are and who other people are dictate how we show up and how we engage. And so we just gonna have a real honest conversation tonight And for those of you that sit outside of the Black community, you get to overhear some things that are really important. For you to understand, and to understand that we wrestle with, but also we know other people wrestle with. And so we realize that some of the issues around narrative have everything to do with how we value ourselves and value each other. And so if anybody grew up and is part of Generation X, or before, we've heard things like, "Ooh, they got good hair," or "They got bad hair," and it's like, it's just the hair that grows out of your head. Why did we assign value to that? Who taught us that? It's the narrative. We talk about skin color, and we prioritize people's value in our narrative based on skin color. Anybody see Spike Lee's School Days? And all that went on in that space. Those stories are those stories that not only shape us and how we see us and how we see us in the world, but it also shapes how other people see us, because they overhear these stories, but they don't know the heart and soul behind the stories. And so when you only get one part of the narrative, you will see people a certain way. You will encapsulate them in one moment. And so when we think about narrative, think about it's the story that helps us to live more fully into who we've been sent to be or not in this world. And so what stories are we telling about us, to us? Some of the worst conversations we have are with ourselves. We're not smart enough. We're not cute enough. We're not thin enough. And the list goes on. And then there are some of us that understand we are Black and we're beautiful. Say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud, James Brown. Some of us understand what it means to anchor in the fullness of our humanity and our God-gifted image in which everyone is created. And so the reason why narrative is so powerful is because it defines for us the world we live in. It defines how we move in this world. It defines how we be in this world. It defines how we see in this world. It defines what we prioritize. More importantly, it defines how we treat one another. Why do our stories matter? Our stories matter because oftentimes when we hear the historic measures about the United States, we hear about a group of men that came and colonized a space, and they often want to call them the founding fathers. Now, granted, they may have fathered many of enslaved children, but they're not our founding fathers. They just created something that they took from someone else. So think about the stories that we've heard over and over again that are not anchored in reality, but anchored in someone's myth. And then what it does to prioritize and add value to someone else's life while devaluing others. And so it's important that we know this, that we understand this, that we claim this, and that when we're telling our stories, that we're telling them so that others will know. Throughout this month, we're expecting a variety of different stories to inspire, to cause you to think, to cause you to want to go and look and search. We hope that we will and not only encourage you, but introduce you to some voices that you haven't heard that are a part of the landscape, some people that you didn't know about, some stories that you hadn't heard, but you can connect to. Because ultimately, when we begin to hear other people's stories, we see that we have more in common than what separates us. And so I'm going to, slide a little bit and tell you a story. I'm clergy, and I worked in rural white America. And I found that it was only when I was able to connect to the story that people look beyond my gender, my color, my age. It was the story that connected us, because based on just my outward presentation, in their eyes, I was less than. I shouldn't be where I was, and how dare I be smart, or any of those other things. But when we started telling stories about childhood and playing games and the food that sometimes we ate or what made us comfortable, it broke down those barriers where you heard these definitive messages like Black people are. And you'd be like, well, wait a minute, are we? How many do you know? Um, who have you encountered outside of what you've heard on your favorite TV loop? Who else have you talked to? And so for many of the people that I encountered, I was the first African American Black person they'd ever had in their homes, that they'd ever been up close and personal to. And it was the first time they'd ever heard a narrative other than what had been reinforced by the community in which they lived. So as we think about our stories and we think about our history and we think about the people, you see a picture of some of the ancestors that we know really well, Shirley Chisholm and Frederick Douglass and Malcolm X. Um, and so when we think about these people and we think about what they did, what is powerful is not just the work that they did, but the story about them. It's Frederick Douglass being enslaved and fighting for his freedom and daring to stand and challenge white people who claim to be Christian on just how Christian some of their stuff was, and challenge them on, if this is what you say in your legal documents that all men are created equal, then why does that not apply to us? And it's learning that you have the right to push back on narratives that people share in a way that's helpful, that we hope that we gain. We are no longer living in a space where being antagonistic is the answer. We must be smarter than that. We must be more creative than that. And we must use what's at our disposal to counter the narratives that are out there, but to celebrate us in the same way. So, as we think about this world that we have inherited and all the crazy that is unfolding, 3 weeks into a new administration, and justice is wonky, and people's money is funny, and their change is strange, and we're trying to figure out if the Constitution is worth the paper that it's written on, and we're trying to figure out if the leaders have lost their minds or if they really are just this bad. And really, we're trying to figure out, what does it mean to be American in a space where there are people who have a particular narrative about who they think America should be and where we fit in. And I want us to know that we fit right in the middle of it. We belong here. Everyone belongs here. And everyone's story feeds into this bigger story. Whether you're an immigrant with an I or an immigrant with an E, whether you are migrating from one place in the country to another, whether you work in the fields or you work in corporate America, whether you have money or not, whether you're Black or white or brown, there's more than enough for all of us. But the narrative that keeps being fed to us is that somehow one of the richest countries in the world doesn't have enough resources to go around. And they would have you to think that 13% of the nation's population is 97% of the problem. Why is it important for us to understand the narrative and what's going on? Because it's only by countering those narratives that we change the atmosphere. So as we think about this space of justice, and as we think about what it means to be part of this process, some of the research that I've done reminds me that Black people fought that the United States might work in a more equitable way. We wouldn't have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, which we consider the civil rights amendments that come in the late 1800s. If it were not for Black people working with white people who understood there was something wrong with this struggle, saying that there's got to be a better way. We not operate. We got all this stuff written down, but we not living into it. But how many of us know how formerly enslaved people fought and worked, and Black men who gained the right to vote are the ones that were instrumental in us getting that first set of legislative movement that moved this country more to a democratic space and a less of a non-democratic space that kept forcing the hand of folks. So often, we get the story of, oh, there was a civil war and the slavery ended, and all that's just past. It's not the past. The past is prologue. We are living in this cycle because we've not been able to deal with the narrative. We've not been able to tell the full story and sit in the dis-ease and the discomfort of not necessarily being perfect in our positioning, and people that had some wrong motives. But if that's the story that you want to gravitate to, then yeah, your feelings are always going to be hurt when you hear the bigger story of how people began to work together, the bigger story of building coalition and building relationship, the bigger story of building on those knowledge pieces. You begin to understand that we've been working diligently to make the United States a more perfect union from the beginning. So there is danger in one story. And let me tell you why there's danger in one story. How many of you can raise your hand on how many of you got family members and y'all been places and there's a story that's being told and it's being told by several different people. They were all there, but it's got a different flair. Anybody had that encounter, right? And so what we know about story is it gets filtered through who you are. It doesn't mean that it's less true. It doesn't mean that it didn't happen that way. What it means is that I saw something that captured my attention in this experience that maybe you didn't see. This hit me in a different way. Well, what we wrestle with right now is this desire to tell one story about who the United States is. And if we get anchored in that one story, white male landowners are the only people worth anything in this country. They're the only ones that have done any work in this country. They're the only ones that deserve to do and to be in control. And all the rest of us should just be happy to be here. You find something wrong with the dangerous piece of that story? There's danger in this one story that we like to tell about George Washington, who cut down a cherry tree that he didn't cut down, who had wooden teeth, but they were actually his enslaved people's teeth, who treated his enslaved people like family, but if you treated me like family, then you would have freed me, right? We like to tell that story, but it's not the only story. There are a multiplicity of stories. There's a story of the indigenous people who were willing to help these folks coming in not die. There is the story of the indigenous people who fought and who have been in solidarity with those people who got pulled from their country on ships to be enslaved in this country, who were like, hey, no, that's not gonna work. We can't do it this way. We gonna work with y'all. We gonna figure this out. But we don't tell that. We don't tell about the coalitions that were built with Mexicans who were part of this nation. And then we get the story that if those people were just not here, everything would be fine. It's those people who are the problem. And so if we only anchor in this one vision, this one story, we miss out on the beauty of the tapestry of the multiplicity of stories that make us who we are. We are a broken and fragile democratic republic. We are made up of people from all over the world. And in the midst of trying to create a new space, there were some people that were brought here that came with so much that no one talks about. We don't talk about the fact that you wouldn't have rice and yams and other grains and foods if African women hadn't been braiding those seeds in their hair. We don't tell the story about all the different rebellions that went on because we like to only tell about what was going on with Nat Turner because he ends up dying, and John Brown, who ends up dying as well. But we don't tell about all the other things that go on in this country that allow you to know that Africans weren't docile and that they weren't okay with their circumstances, but they learned to work within them. We don't talk about the various different places in the continent that people came from, the various different languages that they spoke, and the way in which they use these communication skills to find ways of creating community and building family and building bridges. And not just bridges to each other, but bridges to these folks who could not see, could not value their humanity, and yet they understood the importance of all of them needing to find a way to work it out together. These are the stories I don't want people to tell. These are the stories I don't want people to know, because if we find that we have more in common than what separates us, then we begin to ask the question, what's wrong with these cuckoo birds at the top? And yes, I call them cuckoo birds. That's the nicest thing I can say about these folks right now. What's wrong with you? Why are you hoarding all the resources when we have more than enough? Why don't you want people to have their basic needs met if you keep saying that you're trying to make things better? Better for whom? Right? And so until we're able to tell the story correctly, until we're able to engage in these stories with each other, until we're able to listen to our stories but own our stories. I mean, most of us need to tell the truth. We got some sideways people in our family. We love them, but they little nuts. Some of them we can't take places. That doesn't make them any less family, doesn't make them any less love, doesn't make them any less important in the landscape of who we are. It just means they sideways. The United States is sideways, y'all. And it doesn't mean that we're any less of who we're going to be or who we can be. It means that we're human. And so herein lies the danger in that one story that sometimes we want to make the story. What it means to be American is as diverse as the number of people sitting in this Zoom room tonight. It means different things. Different symbols mean different things to us. It doesn't make us less American. It doesn't make us less invested. What it means is it makes us human, and it means that we found our own story. And we have to be able to tell that story so that other people can see our common bonds and not just what separates us. So, who are we? Right? Who are we? We're phenomenal people. We've heard those words from the great poet Maya Angelou. But these words, I think, are important as I think about holding up some of the voices in our community. So Langston Hughes talks about the Negro speaks of rivers and allows us to see the breadth and depth of who he saw Black people as. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood and human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the night and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I seen its muddy bottom turn to golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusty rivers. My soul has grown deep like rivers. We are amazing people who've known and traveled through time and space to be in the places where we are, and our stories converge to make us even greater. We must claim those stories. We must tell those stories. How many of you have heard of Robert Smalls? Anybody heard that story? Hand? Anybody? Yes, no, I can't see the chat, y'all. Don't. So if you throw it in the chat, I'm not gonna see it. So can I get yes or no? Yes, Patrick, I see you. Okay. So for those who aren't familiar with the Robert Smalls story, he was a man who was born enslaved in Beaufort, South Carolina. And what's unique about his story is that his mom had worked on the plantation in the fields, but she was now working in the house, and so it was a different experience. But she didn't want her son to grow up not understanding the evils, the vileness, the inhumane treatment of other people that look like him on the plantation. So she did not shield him from the beatings and the mistreatment and the harm of what chattel slavery looked like in these United States. And so he grew up a tad bit indignant about a whole lot of stuff, like just like I'm not having this, right? Like this is just not okay with me. I don't know what this is all about. But so he was a little rebellious. You know, he ended up in jail a few times. But he finally found his way and started working on the docks and working in the shipyards. And he was able to get married. He married a woman named Hannah. They had children, and he was able to move and have a place to live with his wife and his children, still enslaved, still having to work, but being able to do it in but what he realized is what he was not created to be enslaved. He wasn't created to do none of that. And so he devised a plan after he'd been working on these docks. He had been working on a ship called the Planter, which was a Confederate ship at this particular point. So when the war broke out, this was a Confederate ship. He's in the South Carolina, Confederate. And so he had gained the trust of the crewmen that were working with him and the white men who were in charge. And he devised a plan, he and his wife, like, okay, so one of these days we gonna get free. And this is how we gonna do it. So when the three men who were the white men that owned everything and were running everything went to sleep or went away, if truth be told, they may have gotten drunk. He decided that he had learned enough, and he learned all the hand signals. He learned how to run that ship, take care of that ship. He knew it all. And so when they got the opportunity, he put on a Confederate jacket, got behind the wheel of that ship, and took that ship out of the harbor. And so um, he knew all he knew all the symbols and signs and things that he needed to have in order to get the ship into to where he needed to go, but didn't count on encountering the Union ship. And so, as the story is told, there was fog, and they were trying to figure out how to keep that Union ship from firing on them. And his wife told him to get a sheep. And so he got a sheep, and they were running that sheet up the flagpole. And just as the Union soldiers were getting ready to fire, the sun burned the fog off, and they were able to see the flag of surrender. And they were like, look, we're going to give this ship to you when we coming with you. And so he gets his freedom. He goes on to work and to fight in the Union Army. He becomes one of, highly decorated person, but never is commissioned in the military, but definitely does some things in the Navy. He makes good money. He then creates these spaces of wanting his children to learn and wanting other kids to learn. And when the opportunity affords him, he goes back to South Carolina and dares to buy the plantation that he was raised on. And he was then able to cast his vote because 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment experience, it gives Black men this space of their humanity being seen a little more fully and the right to vote. And so he serves in the House of Representatives. He serves at the local level and at the U.S. level. He does great things, but how many of us know that story and know what that means for us? How many of us know that there were a lot of things that went on where Black and white people worked together until the ruling class was like, "Nah, this ain't gonna work, y'all. They gonna get together and kick us out." So there has been a concerted effort to kill the narrative and to create other, and not only create other, but then to create dissension. Why is this important? It's important because when you know the story, then you know how to counter the foolishness that people are sending your way. You know how to say, yeah, that might be your version, but that's not really what happened. And so let's traffic in truth. Let's talk about this. Let's reframe this. The more we know about who we are, the better we're able to show up in the world with our feet planted, with our hearts anchored, and with the ability to do the work that we've been sent in the world to do. So much of what we need to do gets hidden because somebody has a story about us that doesn't represent who we are. And then we have to fight through that narrative in order for us to even show up just a little bit with our humanity intact. And so, anybody that knows me knows that I like books. And what we're hoping to help you do, because we are living in a time where authoritarian rule is real. And the first thing of an authoritarian rule is to get rid of the stories, right? It's to get rid of the books. And so we've seen them, nix Black history, and the celebration of Black history, and all of those things in classrooms. We've seen them ban books. We've seen them coming for things that don't seem to be as important, but they really are. The stories that we hold give us keys to see a future in different ways. And so we're going to invite you to start thinking about how you create your own library. And that library starts with your own stories. So you get to start thinking about, how do I tell my story? How do I want generations after me to remember who we are and what our family did, but how that then feeds into the story of the community that we live in. So some of you don't know this, but I'm from West Virginia, and most people look at me like they're Black people in West Virginia. They want to know if we have teeth. They want to know if we have bathrooms. They want to know if we wear shoes. Yes, to all of those things. And so the reality that I live with is that I am often not taken seriously when I say I'm from West Virginia. So, how can a Black female be from West Virginia? And I'm like, but I'm among some smart Black folk that come from West Virginia. Katherine Johnson is from West Virginia. She went to a historically Black college, West Virginia State University. And the question is, when we have these hidden figures and we don't know the stories and we only get bits and pieces of the stories, again, we don't know our greatness. We don't understand. And what we know from an education perspective is that when we see ourselves in the curriculum, when we see ourselves in the story in helpful ways, we do better. Our babies do better. They show up better. When you can't see yourself, how can you imagine anything else than what somebody else is feeding you, where you're absent? And so we're going to invite you to think about how you create your story and how you create your library, and how then you not only cultivate that library, but then you preserve that library. So Dr. Asia is going to put a list that we started, and each week we're going to add to that list, because there will be new books that are added based on what we're focused on for the week, to that list. Many of these books you may already have, many of them you may not. I hope that it's a beginning point for you, as again, you reclaim your narrative, as you think about the resilience of your people, your family, our people, who we are as human beings, and the places where we've built bridges in order not to be at odds with one another, but to be in community with one another. I hope that as we continue this week, you will learn things that you hadn't learned before, be reintroduced to some things that maybe you hadn't considered at a deeper level. And more importantly, my hope is that you learn the power of your own story, the power of using the gift of your narrative to navigate a world that is bent on telling only one story. So this week, we're going to talk about reclaiming our past through family stories and community stories. We're going to talk about the Black church story and the places where it's gone sideways and how we can pull it back and redeem it and what that means for our future and for our current space. We're going to talk about current stories and the music that we listen to. I don't know about y'all. Kendrick Lamar, They Not Like Us. Y'all might want to listen to that and ask some different questions. There's some other things. There's some mixed messages going on in there. and so I know that we get caught into the beats and we get caught into the frenzy and what the hype is. But I would venture to say that if you really and truly unpack the stories and you unpack the narrative, that it may give you some pause. And I would begin to ask the question again. I'm a Gen X person, so I grew up with rappers Delight, and Kid and Play, and all these different people from rap and hip hop, and so we always had the story of what was going on. And then we did a little bit of the risque stuff. We had TLC and we had Salt and Pepper. Let's Talk About Sex. We had all these different things. Some of them served to tell our story and to tell what was going on that other people weren't seeing. Some of them served to tell the story and for us to kind of claim a space of being human and being able to see and experience the breadth and depth of life. Some of it kind of questionable, and then some is the art that we put out and the narratives that we're sharing, both in our community and beyond, helpful or harmful. So we're going to have that conversation in a little more in depth, and then we're going to talk about mental health. Some people may not think mental health is part of reclaiming the narrative, but again, we inherited a narrative about who we are that does not fully see us as human. So that means that oftentimes the medical world hasn't treated us as human. I saw someone write in the chat before we started, Henrietta Lack saved my life. And that's a story that's really important. And so I think one of the things that, as we're talking about mental health and reclaiming our story and our resilience and our narrative, is to talk about the importance of knowing that we have to take care of ourselves, mind, body, and soul. And that mental health is key and important. It's key and important for all of us, but we have an expert that's going to also talk about the way in which that impacts African American males and how we reimagine that story, how we tell that story from a space of strength and not weakness. And one of the things that I also want to say before I open it up for questions and answers is to say this. We spend a lot of time telling people to, work on their weaknesses, go and get this training, go and do this. I want to say to y'all that I want to reframe that narrative and tell you to capitalize on the strengths that you have. Spend as much time as you can doing the goodness and putting that out in the world. Sometimes the weakness is not your gift to share with the world, but we've been told to focus on that in some ways. And sometimes that takes our attention away from what's most important. Whose narrative is feeding how you see yourself in the world and how you show up in the world? Are you showing up with greatness because someone has told you that you are great? Are you clear about the fact that your soul has known things beyond what you see and that you can connect to those things in a variety of different ways? Are you telling the story about how loved and gifted you are, and that love and giftedness propels you to do the thing that you do best in the world so that the world's a better place because you showed up in it, because your story connected with somebody else's story to make this a better story for all of us. So I hope you're excited about what we're going to do this month. I look forward to hearing from you and being in dialogue with you. Are there questions, thoughts, concerns?
What an incredible way, honestly, to begin our Black History Month speaker series. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Sharletta Green, for your powerful insights and for grounding us in the importance of reclaiming our narratives. Your words, Dr. Green, remind us that history isn't just something we look back on, it is something we continue to shape, to live, and to pass forward. Um, we open the floor now for any questions that you may have, that the audience may have, any comments, any feedback.
Yes. I
Yes.
thank you very much, Dr. Sharletta, for your conversation, I would call it tonight, for your speech, for everything that you said. And I adore you for, being a reverend and a doctor.
Thank you.
Because we do need the knowledge, we do need the wisdom, we need the understanding through education. And you have said a lot tonight. I am in Dr. Miramonte's class, and I'm so glad that she invited us to this conversation because Black history, women's history, the United States history, whatever history it is. I was born and raised in Liberia, West Africa. So I do have my story of how I came to the United States to learn. And I hope one day that I can go and take my story back, not to live, but to let the people know. I work with Los Angeles Unified School District, and I have learned a lot, and I want to give back to the children. I'm a teacher, to the children of the United States, of our inner city communities, and I also want to give back to the communities of Liberia, the children. I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm sure that you will, and that when you tell your story, it will inspire some child to find and dig deep and do more than what they thought was possible. So thank you for that. I
Thank
see
you.
some other hands up.
Yeah, Kimberly, please go ahead. You have a question?
Yes, thank you so much. And Dr. Green, wonderful, inspiring presentation. Thank you so much. Dr. Green, we're always told that we shouldn't give in to the negative because it doesn't solve anything. We're realistic. There are no Pollyannas around here. But how can we still keep the balance of the realism and knowing how important it is, our responsibility about the narrative, while acknowledging what is happening every single day? It seems like we hear something. How can we keep this balance, though, to still stay positive and inspired and be the light and be the best change agents and leaders that we can with all this happening?
Okay. So thank you for that question. And I want to answer it in a couple of different ways. So the first thing is we live in reality. And reality means that there are going to be some good days and there are going to be some bad days. There are going to be some tears. There's going to be some anger. There's going to be some cussing and fussing, because I'm a good cussing and fussing human being. Now, I might not cuss like everybody else because Dr. Gabby loves it when I'm like, what in the flying fig Newton is going on with this, So I think we have some examples from our ancestry that we don't capitalize on. So I had the opportunity to hear Harry Belafonte while I was a student at Emory. He used to come and speak. He along with Jimmy Carter and some other folks. And so I adored my time at Emory because it gave me that space. But I was in the space where, there was the Andrew Young and John Lewis and all these people who had been part of a movement that shifted the atmosphere, not just here in the United States, but around the world. But King, before he died, was not okay with what was going on in the United States. And he said, I fear I have integrated my people into a burning building. And he was really upset about that. His soul was not okay about that. And the title of his last sermon that he did not get to preach was, I fear America might just go to hell. So I think we have to be realistic. And I think we also have to protect our peace. I think we tell the truth, and we tell the truth in love. And when people don't want to receive what you need or what you're trying to offer them, shake the dust from your feet and let them go by themselves, right? So part of it is knowing what it is that you're called to do in the moment. And you can always celebrate your story and lament the foolishness, because I do it every day. I'm like, oh, Agent Orange is up to no good once again, but Lord, you've been good. You know, like you have to traffic in realness. And I don't think sometimes we do that. I think sometimes people expect us. So I was born in the time I was born in, because if I had been born on a plantation, we would not have had this kind of conversation at all. Or born in a different time, because I might not have made it to adulthood, because I am not that kind of human being. I'm not going to dance for you. I might not be able to sing for you. But what I can do is tell you the truth. And so I think part of it is knowing what we can do when we can do it and doing it. And if that means you need to take a step away to do some grieving, because grieving is a process. And some days we grieve, and some days we lament, and some days we mad as all get out, and we want to cuss, fuss, and throw things. And it's okay. But we keep telling the story in hopes that someone will hear it. We keep telling the story in hopes that some seeds get planted. I may not get the harvest from that, right? We keep telling the story because we may be watering seeds that have already been planted. And we keep remembering that the work is not all up to us. We have one small part in this work. And if it's just to encourage one person on the way, then you encourage them the best that you can. If it's just to sit with someone in their pain and help them know that they are not alone, that's what we do. If it's just to say over and over again, this is a mess and y'all need to fix it. I heard, and y'all know, I'm not a big social media person, but my brother sends me things because that's how he communicates with me. And he sent me a video where this woman was praying, and she said she wasn't even atheist, but she was praying that God would take this man because he was messing up. He ain't got to 2 weeks and was just tearing things up. I think we have to tell the truth. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves in telling the truth. I think it's okay to say that we're hurt. I think it's okay to say that we're angry, we're disappointed. I think it's okay to say, I don't understand some of these folks. And I am known for saying to Jesus, look, take your people, because they've gotten on my last nerve. And if we're not trafficking with Jesus and we walking with somebody else, divine, take whoever it is you need to take, because they're in the way. I understand those things. And so I think it's being honest with yourself and with everyone else. I think it's not allowing somebody to steal your joy because they didn't give it to you and they can't take it away from you. And that you remember words have power. And just as we've been living in the midst of somebody else's nightmare because they've been speaking that foolishness for far too long, it's time for us to start speaking truth and love and telling the goodness and the greatness of who humanity can be when we are not acting a complete fool. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Green. So comprehensive. Thank you.
You're welcome. I see a couple other hands, Erica and Patricia. Yes.
Well, first of all, and so this is Erica, Dr. Green. Thank you so much for this presentation tonight. This was wonderful. I expected no less. I loved your metaphor about, planting seeds and watering them, and understanding that some of the work that we do, we may not see the flower, the bloom. We may not be here for that, but we need to keep pushing through to make sure that generation after generation is taken care of. So that was one thing. And so I appreciated even that comprehensive response you just gave. But I have this question, and I don't even know if it's a question that can be answered in this moment. But I'm always wondering, based upon the collaborative work I do within my community and with the organizations, I was looking at the gallery, and I see all of these wonderful faces and all of these women, and all of these, scholars, but I'm looking for white men. And I see a couple of non-brown, black and brown faces, but how do we engage them, since we know that collective understanding is what's necessary to bring about the cultural change that we need to happen? And I don't even know if that's a question that can be answered right now. That maybe it's just a question that always sticks with me, but I just wanted to at least put that out.
No, it's a good question, and it's one that we can answer. And it's not a simple answer, so please hear me on that.
Okay.
So I told you about at the beginning about being clergy and working in white spaces. And the reality that it is only when you build relationships with people that some of their perspectives change, right? And so I had a man who did not like black people, and he was clear about using the N-word. He had Obama toilet paper in his house, right?
Wow.
And this was a man that I had to pray with. This is a man that I had to preach to. This is a man who, when his family was sick or somebody was in the hospital, I had to show up for. I had to, because I was the clergy person in charge. And so he had a lot of preconceived notions about people he had no context for, and he said a lot of unkind things. I sang Jesus Keep Me Near the Cross quite a bit under my breath. But what I learned through that is, if you never encounter and engage someone who is absolutely, positively polar opposite, then you never know how to engage with having conversation. So I let this man say all he wanted to say. And then I would ask him, like, so other than me, what other black person have you been in community with? None. And other than, the brown child that's part of y'all's family that y'all pretend is not brown, what other people do y'all engage with? None. And so I had to meet him at his point of being. And his point of being was a space of ignorance. It was a space of not being exposed. It was a space of being told narratives that weren't true. And my task was to use what was at my disposal to shift the atmosphere. Now, like, not all of us are going to do that work, because not all of us are called to. That was my call for the moment. It ain't my call now. But spending time with these people, challenging them in love, like, so why do you think that? Where did you hear that? And what proof do you have that that's true? So it was this constant thing, but I kept showing up for him when his family needed me. I kept showing up for him when life was kicking him in his teeth. I kept being the presence that God needed me to be in that moment. And in the end, before that man closed his eyes, he was telling people, she like family to us. And I was like, really? Like, really? And in the end, that was it. And when he died, I was no longer the clergy person in charge there, but they called me. Now, that ain't got nothing to do with me, because if it had been left up to me, I'd have had a whole flesh moment and cussed him out in the name of Jesus and thrown some stuff at him. But I didn't, because that's not what the assignment is. Right. The assignment is to be who you have been sent in the world to be, despite that, and to keep showing them. Because if I keep showing up in a way that you don't expect me, you can either curl up and cry, fight if you want to, but eventually you're going to have to move. It's building bridges and relationships with people. It's really telling your story over and over again. And you can tell the same thing over and over again without telling them anything about who you are. But it's listening to their fears, because what you find out is it's anchored in fear. They've been told a lie about who they are. And when Black people show up smart, gifted, unbothered by their stuff, they don't know what to do with that, because they've been told something about us. They've been told something about themselves. when you've been told that you're on top of the world and everything belongs to you and everything should and everybody should bow down to you and you should get what you want, and people show up and show out and be like, yeah, that's not how it happens. That messes with you.
Yeah.
So literally what we're doing is disrupting the narrative in their heads that has framed everything about them. And ultimately what we're having to deal with is their fear reaction. And fear reaction anchors in hate, it anchors in othering, it anchors in untruth, it anchors in misogyny, it anchors in all the isms, because at the core of who people are sometimes, their fear keeps them from being who they've been sent in the world to be, because they're chasing after something they were never intended to be.
So I received that response, Dr. Sharletta. Thank you so much for that, for answering. But I probably asked it wrong, but I really was referring to academicians. You know, you just referred to a person who obviously had it was outwardly hateful, outwardly racist. But what about those folks who are in our sphere, of influence, or in our space every day, who believe themselves to be allies, but who don't show up for like sessions like this, where we're having perhaps what would be an uncomfortable conversation, but it's necessary for them to hear it, right?
It's the same process.
Okay.
It's the same process. It's still showing up and saying, I came to this because this was important to you. I want to know why it is that you didn't come to this when it was important to me. And you keep saying that I'm important to you. You keep telling me this, but what you keep doing tells me something different.
All right.
Sometimes you just got to speak the truth.
I received that. Thank you.
You're welcome. I see another hand.
We have Patricia and then Veronica afterwards. Go ahead,
yes.
please.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Dr. Green.
Hello.
So I would like to find out, how do you change the narrative of the people that you love in your life? Because I lost my husband and I lost my son. But when I lost my son, he said to me, Mommy, why didn't they love me? And that sticks with me because he felt like no one around him outside of me loved him. So how do we fix the narrative within our own story?
Your own
Stories
story.
we have to tell.
Yeah. So I think the first thing is that, again, we start out from the place of love, right? Because we love our people. We may not know how to show it to them, but we love our people. We like the ones that are sideways. We like the ones that, need deep-rooted help. But I think part of the challenge with our personal narratives, our personal stories, is that they're rooted in so much trauma that we haven't been willing to own. And we must say that we are both traumatized from our personal experiences, but we're traumatized from our communal experience. And we have to name that. And then we have to be willing to say, I know this is how we've seen it. This may be how we've been walking this, but there may be a better way. And so it's not just knowing that, but it's learning to live that. And that's a daily process. That's not something that's going to happen overnight. It may not happen with your generation. It may come 2 generations behind you, but you start the work. You start the work by saying, we're going to own the fact that there's trauma. We're going to own the fact that there's been some things that are not right. That doesn't make us bad. It makes us human, and it makes us have to deal with it. When we choose not to deal with it, that's when we start anchoring and working in bad spaces, because then we cause harm. And we don't just cause harm to ourselves, we cause harm to others and for future generations. And so I think it is first acknowledging the hurt and the pain, acknowledging the lie that has been told over and over again for truth, and then setting the record straight. And sometimes we just have to write that story down. Sometimes, and that's the reason why we're talking about like telling your own story. It's writing your own story. And it's starting out by saying it ain't always been good. It's not always been easy. If I can draw from, the biblical text, just talking about the fact that when you listen to the prayer of Daniel and Nehemiah, they both start out by asking for forgiveness on behalf of an unfaithful ancestry. The ancestors didn't get it right. The people that came before us didn't get this right. And we don't get it right either, but we're gonna try to. But before we ask for anything, we're gonna tell the truth, right? And so I think that's where we start. One step at a time, one relationship at a time, one story at a time. And just seeking to find the healing that we need. And sometimes that may mean we need some professional help to help us do that, to help us understand and unpack our own story so that we can then tell the story from a place of strength, of wholeness, even when we're talking about the brokenness. Does that help? You're welcome. Yes, ma'am. Veronica.
How you doing, Dr. Sharletta?
I am well. How are you?
I'm fine. Whew, girl, I have got to give it to you. The power, the energy, the words that are spoken with so much clarity because I've been looking for some answers because I'm in oh gosh, got a grandson. I'm trying to understand and I'm looking for the answers. But the way you broke this down is so clear and it kind of gave me some clarity because it seems like it got so heavy and I was like, I don't know what to do. But I want to thank you so much. So much. I am so grateful for this. And yes, I will see you on all these little meetings because I need this. I need this power. I need this energy. I need this knowledge. It's just, you're like God sent right now, whether you know it or not. And that's what I want to say. Thank you. Thank you so much, lady. Miss Dr. Thank you. Thank you so much. I am so grateful for this. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. And so if I might encourage all the people that are in the room tonight, no matter what your faith tradition, prayer is a good place to always start. Prayer. I'm anchored in who I am, but I am not one of those people that's trying to get you to shift to what I believe or why I believe it. But I know for myself that prayer changes things. And I know from the friends that I have who are Muslim and Jewish and Hindu that prayer changes things. And so sometimes in the story, we have to find what our faith story is as well and appeal to that faith story for the strength that we need to inform the stories that we are engaging with in the world around us. And so if I might be so bold as to share that with you, I would not be who I am if I didn't share that. And I would like to think that as I say that, I have some colleagues that have been gracious enough to allow me to walk journeys with them where we have prayed together, and we may not be from the same tradition, but we knew the power of praying with each other, and they have prayed for me. And I know that because of the relationships that we've built and cultivated, that I could trust that. And not only could I trust that we then could trust each other with our stories. And those stories make us better as people, as leaders, as scholars, because we recognize, again, the power of the multiple stories. And so we may have different faith traditions and we may have different cultural traditions, but we're human, and humans need love. Humans need clothing and shelter and food and connection and community. And because we've anchored in our humanity and we value each other, the differences in our story are just those spaces where, girl, we didn't know that. Oh, wow, I'm so sorry. That hurts, right? And so I think part of reclaiming our narrative and being resilient is also reclaiming our humanity. And in humanity, it's not about the individual. It's about all of us. We are on this little blue globe that's circling around in the universe together. And either we all gonna live together or we all gonna die together, because when Earth decides that she's tired of us, she gonna shake us all off. And it won't matter how much money you have or if you have a spaceship, because when she's tired, she gonna be tired. Just saying.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
Thank you so much for that.
Yes. Anyone else? I'm not getting to read the chat, so so if you put something in the chat and I've missed it, I apologize. I'm
everyone is thanking you for an incredible opening of the Black History Month. Honestly, truly, Dr. Green and I echo their voices. And the conversation, actually, tonight's conversation is just the beginning. So as we move through this month, we will continue to explore the stories, the truths, and voices that define Black History Month and its ongoing impact. Each session in this series is an opportunity to learn, reflect, and engage with narratives that inspire resilience and transformation. I do echo Dr. Green's voice, encourage all of you to stay connected and participate in the upcoming sessions. And here is just a reminder, Dr. Ghazi, I know she's going to have also the reminder of the schedule, the upcoming sessions in the chat. Next week, February 12, we will dive into the narratives of the Black Church, a cornerstone of community activism and faith, featuring Reverend Dr. John Kinney, Reverend Joseph Hill, and Reverend Dr. Sharletta Green. Later this evening, on that same day, on February 12, we have two sessions, one early in the morning, 7:30 in the morning, and one in the evening. We will hear from an inspiring alumni panel with Dr. Ebony Kane, Dr. Renee Dorn, and Reverend Dr. J. Gooseby Smith, alongside special guests as well, as they share stories of perseverance and success. In week 3, on February 19, our student panel will bring us powerful reflections from those currently navigating their academic and leadership journeys, stories that will shape the future. And in week 4, on February 27, we will close the series with Dr. Erlanger Turner, who will guide us through an essential conversation on Black mental health and the unique narratives surrounding Black men. Each of these sessions will continue the work we began tonight, celebrating, reclaiming, and uplifting the stories that matter. And before we close, if we don't have any more questions, and feel free to ask more questions if you have, but I want to take a moment to express my sincere appreciation to everyone who made this series possible. From the dedicated team working behind the scenes to all of you joining us tonight, your presence, effort, and engagement truly make a difference. It is through these collective efforts that we create spaces for learning, growth, and empowerment. So we look forward to seeing you next week. And until then, let's continue to listen, learn, and lead.
Lena, there's additional
there's
questions.
another question. Yeah, there's
Sure.
more
So
questions.
Jonathan had his hand up,
Yes.
And
and
Talisha
then
afterwards.
Talisha.
Right.
Yes.
Talisha, you could go first if you would like to.
Okay. I just it wasn't so much a question. It was just I'm working on like at the end of my dissertation, and it's about telling stories, and I just appreciated everything you were saying about telling stories. I'm telling stories of Black women, and so this was I'm close to the end, so it's that imposter syndrome that kicks in, you know, and it's like, can you do this? Are you really doing this? But this was like really motivational for me to be like, okay, no, you got this, and you have to tell these stories, and I have the stories and everything. It's just writing everything up. So it's like this was good motivation for me to keep going and make sure I tell these stories for these women and they're Black women. So yeah.
Thank you. Congratulations on getting this far. You got this. You got this. Look forward to reading your work and eventually maybe even citing it when necessary. So yes, thank you. All right, so Jonathan, what did you have? And because I have a final benediction that I will always close with. So
Okay, perfect. Yeah. I just want to say thank you for having this space for us. And I was taking notes and I was really very invested. So thank you so much. One of the things that really popped out to me was this idea of narration and how it defines our empirical reality. And Dr. Majidi introduced to us last semester or over the summer the idea of meta narratives and really looking at cultures and trying to be a part of it, to be included, to be and I think that's where I'm coming from this topic is more of the curiosity to learn and to engage is the most important aspect here, and the acceptance of that curiosity where you can make mistakes, but knowing by making those mistakes you're engaging to learn the truth. I think that's the most important. So I just wanted to say thank you for this opportunity to listen to your story and to expand on all of our knowledge, your story, to help us with our empirical reality and observations.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Meta narrative and master narrative, because we are fighting a master narrative right now. That's the main narrative that kind of holds things in tension that somebody has used to completely define not only themselves, but other people. And so we are fighting against a major master narrative that is very small and very limited. And so I'm glad that something that I said resonated with you all tonight. I'm looking forward to being with you the rest of the month and hoping that we provide you with amazing nuggets, again, to build your own narratives and libraries to help in the effort of being resilient people in the communities where we are and making a difference in those places. We are not intended to change the world. We're just intended to impact the world in which we reside in. So that's your community or wherever else. And so, as we get ready to leave, if I can encourage you not to be overwhelmed, because the goal is to overwhelm you so that you then are frozen, that you are not moving, that you are not pushing back. And so sometimes it is turning everything off and seeking to know what story is most important for you to anchor in and you to keep telling so that it makes a difference for someone else. This is generational, intergenerational work. What we start today, what we're building today, we may not live in those houses, but we're laying a foundation. And in many cases, we're laying a very different foundation than what was laid for us because of the world we've inherited. So get excited, because we get to write some things differently. We get to hold on to those truths that are important to us. But we also then get to imagine a future that's different. And so as we leave tonight, as is my tradition for those who have been with me on this journey for at least the last 3 years, I do a final benediction, a final blessing, because that is who I am. I will not be less than who I've been sent in the world to be. And so hear these words, my dear brothers and sisters, sisters and brothers from other mothers, from other spaces, from other places, that all then are part of my human family. Blessed divine, whose form is not contained, whose beginnings and whose beingness is so vast, our limited vocabulary cannot encapsulate you, whose love is so magnanimous, our lives cannot contain it. We pause in awe. We bow and honor, we seek insight and wisdom for the world entrusted to, yet neglected by our care. Remind us of our purpose, heal us of our many afflictions in thought, in word, and in deed. Inspire us to envision more than the material things that often hold us hostage and cause hostility among our human kin. Endow us with humility and overshadow us with divine love, that all peoples may live, thrive, and have their needs met. Bind us together in our humanity, strengthen us within our souls, that we may remember who we are and the joy we had before jealousy, greed, envy, and hate stole our birthright. Let us become humans once again through our common bonds of need and communal support for all. This we ask as we depart this night. Guide us back to eternal love and light. Ashe. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Dr. Green. Thank you. Thank you again thank you all for joining us tonight. We truly look forward to seeing you in the upcoming sessions. And until then, have a wonderful evening.